Well, let's check in on Fox and Friends. One of my favorite types of segments is watching Steve Doocy, one of the Fox hosts on that show, say things that make the other hosts really uncomfortable. He's, of course, very unreasonable as well on a bunch of stuff and is usually a typical Fox host, but is really the only one on Fox and Friends who will occasionally fact check Trump or admit the Republicans don't have evidence on Joe Biden to back up the allegations against him. And this sort of moments are always a good time. And my favorite part, as we've discussed, is watching Brian Kilmeade. His face, he just gets all tense and uncomfortable. So I have two moments I want to play. First, Steve Doocy pours cold water on Trump's victory in Iowa and makes a point I've seen a lot of people making, which is Trump did win by a huge margin for a normal candidate, but he's not a normal candidate. He's running a sort of incumbent candidacy because he was just president. And when you take that into consideration, the fact that 50% of the party didn't vote for him is interesting, if nothing else. And obviously Trump is going to be the nominee. That's my expectation, and it seems very, very, very likely. So it's not to say that this is a sign he'll be defeated in the primary, but for what is similar to an incumbent candidacy, not having a more unified party is a bad sign for the general election for Trump. Then that conversation gets to an interesting moment in this morning when I was getting dressed, I was listening to the radio. Nikki Haley, by the way, is going to be with us in the 8 o'clock hour. On the radio this morning, I heard the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, on the radio, and he said, you know, the thing about Donald Trump in Iowa and across the board, he's running essentially as an incumbent, right?
Right.
Well, he said this incumbent only got 50% of the vote in Iowa, and 50% wanted somebody else. Ultimately, he said, and I heard one other D.C. insider say the same thing, you know, an incumbent Republican president running for re-election should be up in the 80 or 90 percentile. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble in your own party.
But he has to take into account that Nikki Haley was on the ballot, and so was Vivek, and Ron DeSantis.
But
so all of those votes will go to Trump if he's the candidate.
The reality of it is even though he's known, even though he's won, he's not an incumbent. And there are people
within
that.
He's running as one.
Well, I'm saying that obviously he's the former president, but you have other Republican people that are in the race. So he's not an incumbent president right now. He lost the last election, and he's coming back and saying, look, making his case to voters.
Well, he doesn't say he lost the election.
Actually, he's actually not even bringing that up anymore.
Oh, he's not bringing it up anymore, Kilmeade says. I don't know about that. We'll get to another clip where Doocy has to fact check something, but first to respond to that. First off, Trump has not stopped bringing up his belief that the election was stolen. That's ridiculous. Now, has he ranted about that less frequently lately? Maybe. I'm sure his advisors are begging him to chill out on that because a bunch of the country despises it, rightfully so, but Trump is still very much on the election denying train. He's the leader of it. He's the conductor of that train. But I find it pretty interesting how those on the right have to contend with that topic, because there it served Lawrence Jones's argument, the guy on the left of the screen, to say, well, Trump lost the last election, so that kind of washed away his incumbent branding somehow. But then MAGA and most of the viewers of Fox News, as they're watching that, are choosing Trump because they don't think he's a loser. They think it was stolen from him, which is, of course, ridiculous. They've had a bunch of years to bring forward evidence and have failed, but that's where they are. So it seems like generally the GOP can't figure out what to do with that lie, how to deal with it. Are we pretending like Trump's a winner or he's a loser, and that makes him not the incumbent sort of vibe, and so him not having as much support right now is actually okay, and he'll do fine in the general, but he lost, but he's going to win this time? I don't really get it. And it's why arguments like this from Nikki Haley aren't going to work on the voters.
Trump says things. Americans aren't stupid to just believe what he says. The reality is, who lost the House for us? Who lost the Senate? Who lost the White House? Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. Nikki Haley will win every single one of those back for us. I've proven that.
And this is something DeSantis has tried as well, but we learned from the entrance polling in Iowa and other polls that have been consistent that nearly 70% of the Republican Party believes the election of Joe Biden was illegitimate. So saying that Trump shouldn't be the nominee because he's a loser, it's true, but it's not going to convince a party that overwhelmingly doesn't think he actually lost. And so now Republican leaders who, for the sake of winning, want to move on from Trump are having to experience the very monster they helped to create. Nikki Haley didn't speak out against Trump's election lies. DeSantis didn't, etc. So now you're trying to win over a party that defines itself by the fictional victimhood of Donald Trump. Tough spot to be in, but that's on you. The next moment from Fox and Friends, here's Doocy fact-checking Trump's claim about New Hampshire Democrats voting in the Republican primary.
So here's the thing. Donald Trump said that New Hampshire law allows for Democrats to vote in the Republican primary. That is not true. You've got to be a registered Republican unless you're undeclared. The last day for a Democrat to change party affiliation was back in October 6th. So that is not accurate, but the thing about New Hampshire is there are so many independents, there are so many undeclared. When they show up at the polling places on Tuesday, they're asked, do you want a Republican ballot or a Democrat ballot? Depending on your party affiliation. If you're a Democrat, you get the Democrat. If you're a Republican, you get the Republican. If you're undeclared, you can have either.
According to the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office, there's been 4,000 Democratic voters who have switched party affiliation to Republican or undeclared. Nikki Haley said that a lot of people
had to have done that in October.
They have, that's what the Secretary of State is saying. Nikki Haley said that some of these people are crossing over because they don't want Joe Biden. A reporter had the opportunity to talk to a 74-year-old Manchester resident. She supported Joe Biden both times. Hillary Clinton, then Joe Biden in 2020. She's an unenrolled voter, normally votes for Democrats, but she said her primary goal is not to ever let Trump back into office again. So I know she makes the argument that some of these folks are just planning on voting for her in the general election. The NBC interviewed this person. They said, look, they just want to keep Donald Trump out of office.
So it's not true that on election day or today or something, Democrats could decide en masse to go vote for someone other than Trump in the Republican primary. But it is true that if people change their party affiliation weeks in advance, which that deadline has already passed, then they could go vote in the primary. But even if that helps sway the New Hampshire primary, I don't think Trump has too much to worry about for the broader primary, because as I'll continue to say, this is unfortunately the Trump MAGA party now. But I think the fact that it is the Trump MAGA party is alienating enough people that come the general election, Trump will lose. That's of course the hope. And the exciting thing is, as the primary goes along, the reality that Doocy was pointing out in the first clip is giving me more hope on that front. Trump's support within his party seems shakier than he'd like it to be, and we got news that backs this up out of the Iowa caucus. Most likely Republican, and this is from NBC News, Iowa caucus goers say they'll vote for former President Donald Trump in the general election if he's the GOP nominee, regardless of the candidate they're supporting on caucus night. That is, except supporters of former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, with nearly half of them, 43%, saying they'd vote for Democratic President Joe Biden over Trump. So if even a tiny portion of Republicans who would vote for a Republican if it weren't Trump go Biden when Trump is a nominee, that could be a disaster for Trump. And that's exactly why he may try, I guess, to Kilmeade's point, to stop screaming so much that the election was stolen every 2 seconds as we approach the general election. He's seeing these numbers too, and most of the time he can't control himself, but in certain scenarios he'll try to win back some of that support. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. And if you want to go a step further, you can become a member at lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. Make sure you have the alert bell clicked. You've liked the video if you're watching on YouTube, all those great things. And I will talk to you next time.